the city of Homs in Syria, an imam issued an edict authorizing the people in the city to begin eating dogs and cats. This is something that is normally against the religious values of the people of Syria. However, the circumstances within the city became so dire that the people were willing to throw away their religion and do whatever was necessary to survive. Now, the Syrian civil war has been going on for the last 3 years. It began in March of 2011, and up to this point, it has cost the lives of over 140,000 people. To put this number into perspective, think about Vanderbilt Stadium. It holds about 40,000 people. You pack every seat with a corpse, and you line 3 stadiums side by side. That's how many people have lost their lives. Now, Joseph Stalin once said, "A single death is a tragedy, but a million, that's a statistic." Unfortunately, he may be right about this because for too often we don't grasp the magnitude of a number like 140,000. As Americans, as leaders of the free world, we not only have the largest economy and also the largest military, but we also have the largest obligation to use our resources to make a difference in the international community. That's what being a superpower is about. As individuals, because we have all this knowledge in front of us, we have the internet, we have the ability to make a choice. We can choose to either look away, to feel uncomfortable about it, or to do something about it. That is our responsibility here as American citizens. And that is why I support that the U.S. federal government ought to substantially increase the amount of humanitarian aid going to Syrian refugees. But the U.S. federal government won't do anything that the citizens aren't aware of, that citizens don't care about. So at the most fundamental level, it's up to us to build awareness, to care about an issue like this. First, I will go over the problems that we face in Syria, and then I will move on and explain why it is that increasing humanitarian aid is the best way to address these problems. Moving to our first point, the fact of the matter is we care too little about the situation going on in Syria right now, and as a result, we're not doing enough. So the current attitude about Syria is complete indifference. In October of 2013, USA Today published an article that showed that Miley Cyrus articles were 12 times more popular than articles about Syria, even though the articles about Syria appeared twice as often. What this shows to us is that we are lacking something as a nation, a moral compass, a moral conscience that tells us what the important issues are to us in society. At the point where 500 young children are being reportedly killed by their government, we choose to look away from that because it's uncomfortable and turn our attention to what Miley Cyrus is doing on stage. That says something about us as a people, and we're doing something wrong if we continue upon that path. CNN conducted a poll looking at what people thought about this crisis in Syria, and they found that 80% of the people, an unprecedented number, thought that we should be focusing on our problems at home. For the first time in almost a decade, a majority of people said in this poll that the United States should be focusing on its own problems and allow other countries to deal with their issues on their own. This is unprecedented because the United States has always been the bedrock of the international community, and now we're turning back to isolationism. Now, this indifference, this apathy is leading to real problems on the ground in Syria. It's exacerbating the problems that the people there are facing. The United Nations in 2013 asked for a fund of $6.5 billion. However, the international community only raised a meager sum of $2.2 billion, and only $1 billion has actually been distributed to the United Nations at this point in time. And so what this translates to on the ground is that not enough food is being donated to the people in the Syrian refugee camps. In fact, just a couple of days ago, on April 7th, a news report came out and showed that the United Nations had to cut their food donations to Syria by 20% because it was lacking funds. Now, donations were already not enough to get people through, and now the United Nations has to cut their donations even further. This is something that we really do need to address. It's something that we can make a difference on. Right now on the ground in Syria, there are 2.5 million refugees. 78% of these refugees, according to Foreign Policy magazine, are women and children. And so they are most in need of aid. They're living in horrendous circumstances because of foreign fighters on the ground in Syria. There's a new influx of diseases, including polio and measles, and 2-year-old infants are being infected with these diseases. They're not getting enough water, clean water, to drink. And furthermore, they're not getting enough food. All of these things are very basic items that we have the ability to provide, but we simply don't have the willpower to do so. Moving on to our second area of analysis, we already talked about how our apathy is leading to an exacerbation of the problem in Syria. Let's look at how increasing aid is the best way for us to address this problem. Now, many of you guys are thinking, what about all the other options that we can use to solve this problem in Syria? However, there are a number of issues with the alternative solutions being proposed on the ground. The Economist, in last week's edition, issued out a summary of these different suggestions. And what it said was that the situation on the ground is so complicated with so many different fronts fighting each other that the United States is not in a position to end the conflict directly. Therefore, at this point in time, what the United States has to focus on is saving as many lives as possible. And the best way to do that is to increase the amount of aid that we give. We have the ability to reach the United Nations goal of $6 billion. If we were to increase our donation to meet this objective, guess how much our expenditure would increase by in terms of our GDP? It would increase by 0.025%. We have the financial capabilities to make this investment, and we know that this investment will mean the world to the people on the ground in Syria. We just have to find the political willpower to do so. Money is being funneled through the UN Food Program and the UN Relief and Works Agency, and it's being spent effectively. The Washington Post issued an article on December 27th examining how this money is being spent. And the money is going either directly through the United Nations or it's going through non-governmental organizations being distributed directly to the people. So it's not going through a government, it's not going through the hands of some corrupt bureaucrat, it's going through the people who are on the ground doing service work directly into the hands of the people who need it the most. Now, we're not talking about complicated aid, we're talking about food, medicine, and clothing. All of these things are incredibly important for these people here. Now, I mentioned already that 76% of these refugees are children, and there are 1 million children here. And if we look at how important this investment is, we can see that right now all these children know is war. That's all they have been experiencing in the last few years. And if we're able to make this investment right now, we can bring them up out of poverty, give them a new hope for the future. So in conclusion, we can look towards these main issues that I raised up. That first, we have an issue right here at home with our apathy, and that's preventing us from doing enough to address the problem. And second, when we do address the problem, we address it by providing enough food, enough supplies, enough medical supplies in order to make a difference to these refugee camps on the ground. Now, Albert Einstein once said, "The world is a dangerous place to live in, not because there are people there who are evil, but because there are people who don't do anything about it." We have the ability to make a difference here. The question is, do we have the heart to do so?